The shrill wail of the alarm pierced the eerie silence that had settled over the once vibrant Willow Oaks community. Greg Anderson gripped the baseball bat tightly as he peered out the window, his heart pounding in his chest. The power had been cut, plunging the entire neighborhood into a shroud of darkness, save for the ominous glow of the emergency lights. Greg knew he had to act fast. The Homeowners Association had made it clear that his solar panels were in violation of their strict rules, and they had threatened to take drastic measures if he refused to remove them. He had fought them tooth and nail, but their influence and deep pockets had proved too formidable. Now, as the shadows lurked outside, Greg couldn't shake the feeling that this power outage was no mere coincidence. His eyes narrowed, and he steeled himself for the confrontation he knew was coming. Cautiously, he made his way to the front door, clutching the bat like a lifeline. As he peered through the peephole, he caught a glimpse of movement, the unmistakable silhouettes of the HOA's goons, their faces obscured by the darkness. Greg's breath caught in his throat, and he knew he had to act quickly. Swinging the door open, he charged out, the bat raised high, ready to defend his home and his family at all costs. The HOA's lackeys scattered, startled by his sudden appearance. Greg's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of the HOA's ringleaders, the ones who had orchestrated this twisted power play. "Where are you, you cowards?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the eerie stillness of the night. A sinister chuckle rose from the shadows, and Greg whirled around, coming face to face with the smug visage of the HOA president, Margaret Simmons. "Ah, Mr. Anderson," she purred, her tone dripping with condescension. "I see you've decided to join the party." Greg's grip tightened on the bat, his knuckles turning white. "What have you done, Simmons?" "Done?" she replied, her eyes glinting with malice. "Why, we're simply enforcing the rules of our community. Your solar panels were an eyesore, and you refused to comply. Now, the power is out, and the neighborhood is in chaos. Coincidence? I think not." Greg's blood boiled with fury. "You can't get away with this. I'll expose your corruption, your underhanded tactics, everything." Margaret's smile widened, and she casually checked her manicured nails. "Oh, I think you'll find that we can. You see, Mr. Anderson, we have eyes and ears everywhere. And trust me, you don't want to cross us." The sound of approaching sirens pierced the air, and Greg's heart sank. He knew the HOA had friends in high places, and they would use every trick in the book to keep him silent. As the police vehicles pulled up, Greg braced himself for the battle of his life. This was no longer just about solar panels or neighborhood rules. It was a fight for the very soul of Willow Oaks, a battle against a corrupt and ruthless HOA that would stop at nothing to maintain its iron grip on the community. The stage was set, and the high-stakes power struggle had begun. The flashing lights of the police cars cast an eerie glow over the darkened neighborhood as Greg stood his ground, defiant in the face of the HOA's machinations. Margaret Simmons, the HOA president, stepped forward, her expression one of feigned concern. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man has been causing a disturbance and threatening our community." Greg opened his mouth to protest, but the officers raised their hands, silencing him. "Sir, we've received a call about a disturbance. We'll need you to come with us to the station for questioning." Gritting his teeth, Greg knew he had no choice but to comply. As he was led away, he couldn't help but shoot a final, anguished look at his home, where his family was undoubtedly huddled in fear, unaware of the forces conspiring against them. At the police station, Greg was subjected to a barrage of questions, each one seemingly designed to trip him up and cast doubt on his version of events. The HOA's influence was clear, and he knew he had to tread carefully. Just as he was about to lose hope, a familiar face appeared. His attorney, Sarah Wilkins, a fierce and relentless defender of the rights of homeowners against the tyranny of HOAs. "It's a setup, Sarah," Greg pleaded. "The HOA cut the power and tried to frame me as the troublemaker." Sarah's brow furrowed with concern. I suspected as much. The HOA has been on your case for months, and this power outage is far too convenient. Together, they hatched a desperate plan. A gambit that would put everything on the line, but just might give them a fighting chance against the HOA's entrenched power. As the hours ticked by, Greg and Sarah prepared to present their case before the judge, knowing that the entire future of Willow Oaks hung in the balance. The courtroom was a cauldron of tension, with the HOA's lawyers smugly presenting their case, painting Greg as a troublemaker and a threat to the community. But Sarah was relentless, methodically dismantling their arguments and presenting a convincing case that the HOA had orchestrated the entire incident. Just as the judge was about to deliver his verdict, a sudden commotion erupted outside the courthouse. Gasps and shouts filled the air as panicked residents streamed in, their faces etched with fear. "The power is still out," they cried. "The whole neighborhood is in chaos." Greg and Sarah exchanged a knowing look. Their gambit had backfired, but the stakes had never been higher. The battle for Willow Oaks was far from over. The courtroom erupted into pandemonium as the news of the ongoing power outage spread. Greg and Sarah exchanged a tense glance, knowing that their gambit had not gone as planned. The judge, clearly flustered by the unexpected turn of events, called for order in the court. "Order. Order, please." He turned his gaze toward Greg and Sarah, his expression one of skepticism. "Mr. Anderson, it would appear that your claims of the HOA's involvement in this power outage may have some merit. However, I need more concrete evidence before I can rule in your favor." Sarah stood, her posture rigid with determination. "Your Honor, we can provide that evidence. But we'll need time to investigate further and uncover the full extent of the HOA's corruption." The judge nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "Very well. I'll grant a recess, but you'll need to present your findings before the end of the day. The fate of this community hangs in the balance." As Greg and Sarah exited the courtroom, they were immediately surrounded by a group of anxious residents, all clamoring for answers. "What's happening?" One woman cried. "The power's been out for hours, and the HOA isn't doing anything to fix it." Greg raised his hands, trying to calm the crowd. "We're on it, I promise. But we need your help. If you've noticed anything suspicious, anything at all, you need to tell us. The future of Willow Oaks depends on it." The residents exchanged nervous glances, but one by one, they began to speak up, sharing their stories of HOA overreach, unfair fines, and blatant disregard for the community's well-being. Greg and Sarah listened intently, piecing together a disturbing picture of a corrupt HOA that had consolidated power and enriched itself at the expense of the very people it was supposed to serve. As they delved deeper, they uncovered a web of shady dealings, from kickbacks to local politicians to underhanded tactics to silence dissent. The more they learned, the more their resolve hardened. They would not rest until the truth was exposed and the HOA's grip on Willow Oaks was broken. Time was running out, however, and the judge's deadline loomed ever closer. With the power still out and the community on edge, Greg and Sarah knew they had to act fast if they were to have any chance of turning the tide. As they prepared to present their findings, they couldn't help but feel a tinge of trepidation. They were up against a formidable foe, one that had grown accustomed to wielding power with impunity. But with the fate of Willow Oaks hanging in the balance, they were willing to risk it all. The stage was set for a showdown that would determine the future of the community, and the cost of failure was unthinkable. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Greg and Sarah took their places, ready to present the evidence they had uncovered. The judge, his expression grim, leaned forward in his seat, his eyes narrowed with anticipation. "All right, Ms. Wilkins," he said, his voice low and measured. "What have you and Mr. Anderson discovered?" Sarah took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. "Your Honor, what we've uncovered is a disturbing web of corruption at the highest levels of the Willow Oaks Homeowners Association." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in. "We have evidence that the HOA president, Margaret Simmons, has been colluding with local politicians and contractors to line her own pockets. She's been using the association's funds to bribe officials, rig contracts, and silence any dissent within the community. The courtroom erupted in a flurry of murmurs and gasps, and the judge raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "This is a serious allegation, Ms. Wilkins. Do you have proof to back up these claims?" "We do, Your Honor," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "We've obtained financial records, contracts, and sworn testimonies from several residents who have been victims of the HOA's tactics." Greg stepped forward, his expression grim. "Your Honor, the power outage that has gripped our community is no mere coincidence. We believe that the HOA orchestrated this blackout to distract from their own misdeeds and to further tighten their grip on Willow Oaks." The judge's eyes widened, and he leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. "If what you're saying is true, then the implications are staggering. The HOA has effectively been operating as a criminal enterprise, using its power and influence to enrich itself at the expense of the very people it's supposed to serve." He paused, his gaze shifting between Greg and Sarah. "Do you have any idea how far this corruption goes? How deep the HOA's tentacles have reached?" Sarah shook her head, her expression grave. "I'm afraid we've only scratched the surface, Your Honor. But what we've uncovered so far is just the tip of the iceberg." The courtroom fell silent, the weight of the revelation hanging heavy in the air. The fate of Willow Oaks hung in the balance, and Greg and Sarah knew that they were on the verge of a breakthrough, or crushing defeat. As the judge deliberated, the clock continued to tick, the power remained out, and the community's anxiety continued to grow. The high-stakes power struggle had reached a critical juncture, and the outcome would determine the future of Willow Oaks for years to come. The courtroom was a cauldron of tension as the judge considered the evidence presented by Greg and Sarah. The implications of their findings were staggering, and the fate of the entire Willow Oaks community hung in the balance. Finally, the judge leaned forward, his expression grave. "Ms. Wilkins, Mr. Anderson, the evidence you've presented is indeed compelling. However, I must be certain that we are acting on the full truth before I can issue a ruling." Greg and Sarah exchanged a tense glance, knowing that time was running out. The power remained out, and the community's anxiety was palpable. "Your Honor," Sarah spoke up, her voice firm. "We understand your need for caution, but the situation in Willow Oaks grows more dire by the minute. The HOA has shown itself to be a ruthless and manipulative entity, willing to go to any lengths to maintain its stranglehold on the community." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "We propose a bold plan, one that will shed light on the full scope of the HOA's corruption and give the residents of Willow Oaks the justice they deserve." The judge raised a hand, silencing the murmurs that had erupted in the courtroom. "I'm listening." Sarah took a deep breath. "We'll need your cooperation, Your Honor, as well as the support of the local authorities. But if you're willing to take the risk, we believe we can expose the HOA's wrongdoings and restore power to the community, permanently." The judge considered her words, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, Ms. Wilkins. I'm willing to hear your proposal. But understand that the stakes could not be higher." Greg and Sarah quickly outlined their plan, their voices rising with urgency as they described the intricate web of deception and corruption they had uncovered. The judge listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. As they finished, the judge leaned back in his chair, a glimmer of determination in his eyes. "This is an ambitious and risky plan, but I believe it may be our best chance at restoring justice to Willow Oaks. I'll grant the necessary orders and coordinate with the authorities." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the tense faces in the courtroom. "If you're successful, the HOA's reign of terror will finally come to an end. But failure could mean the complete unraveling of this community." Greg and Sarah exchanged a resolute nod. They knew the stakes were high, but they were more determined than ever to bring the HOA's corruption to light and reclaim Willow Oaks for its residents. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, and the outcome would determine the very future of the neighborhood. With the judge's blessing and the support of the local authorities, Greg and Sarah's daring plan was set into motion. The streets of Willow Oaks were abuzz with activity as squad cars and unmarked vehicles converged on the offices of the Homeowners Association. Led by a team of determined investigators, the raid was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to catch the HOA's leadership off guard and uncover the full extent of their corruption. As the officers stormed the HOA's headquarters, Greg and Sarah watched from a distance, their hearts pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. They knew that the success of their plan hinged on the evidence they were about to uncover. The tension in the air was palpable as the investigators scoured the offices, seizing documents, computers, and any other items that might contain incriminating information. The HOA's staff, their faces etched with fear and confusion, were herded into a secure area, their protests falling on deaf ears. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the lead investigator emerged, his expression grim. "We found evidence of widespread corruption, embezzlement, and even connections to organized crime. This goes all the way to the top." Greg and Sarah exchanged a solemn look, bracing themselves for the revelations to come. As the investigation unfolded, a chilling picture began to emerge. The HOA's president, Margaret Simmons, had been using the association's funds to line her own pockets, funneling millions of dollars into offshore accounts and using the money to bribe local officials and contractors. But the corruption didn't stop there. The investigators uncovered evidence of a complex web of shell companies, dummy accounts, and illicit deals that stretched far beyond the borders of Willow Oaks. The HOA had effectively become a criminal enterprise, exploiting its power and influence to enrich itself at the expense of the community it was supposed to serve. The residents of Willow Oaks, who had gathered outside the HOA's offices, watched in stunned silence as the shocking details unfolded. They had known that their HOA was corrupt, but the scale of the deception was beyond anything they could have imagined. As the investigation continued, the power still remained out, and the community's anxiety only grew. But with the evidence mounting against the HOA, Greg and Sarah knew that the tide was finally turning in their favor. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, with the future of Willow Oaks hanging in the balance. And as the net tightened around the HOA's leadership, the residents braced themselves for the reckoning that was to come. The revelations uncovered during the raid on the Homeowners Association's headquarters had sent shockwaves through the community of Willow Oaks. The residents, who had long suspected the HOA's corruption, were now faced with the stark reality of the organization's criminal activities. As the investigation continued, the focus shifted to Margaret Simmons, the HOA's president, who had orchestrated the web of deceit and manipulation that had plagued the neighborhood for years. Greg and Sarah knew that the time had come for the final showdown. They had to confront Simmons and force her to relinquish her grip on the community, but they also knew that the stakes had never been higher. Flanked by a team of determined investigators, Greg and Sarah made their way to the HOA's headquarters, their footsteps echoing in the tense silence that had settled over the building. As they stepped into Simmons' office, they found the woman herself, her composure crumbling as the weight of her misdeeds became too heavy to bear. "It's over, Simmons," Greg said, his voice laced with a mixture of triumph and contempt. "Your reign of terror is finally at an end." Simmons' eyes narrowed, and she let out a bitter laugh. "Over? You have no idea what you're up against, Anderson. This community is mine, and I won't let you or anyone else take it from me." Sarah stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "The evidence we've uncovered speaks for itself, Simmons. You've been using the HOA's resources to line your own pockets, bribe officials, and silence anyone who dared to challenge your authority." Simmons' bravado faltered, and for the first time, a hint of fear crept into her expression. "You have no proof. This is all just speculation and hearsay." Greg leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "Oh, but we do have proof. And the authorities are on their way to ensure that you and your cronies face the full consequences of your actions." The sound of sirens pierced the air, and Simmons' face contorted with panic. She knew that her time was up, that the web of lies and deceit she had so carefully woven was about to unravel before her very eyes. As the police officers flooded the building, Simmons realized that her once formidable power had been reduced to dust. The community she had sought to control and exploit had risen up against her, and she had no choice but to surrender. Greg and Sarah watched in grim satisfaction as Simmons was led away, her protests echoing through the halls of the HOA headquarters. The battle for Willow Oaks had been won, but the scars of the conflict would linger, and the community would have to work tirelessly to rebuild what had been taken from them. As the power finally returned to the neighborhood, the residents gathered, their faces alight with a renewed sense of hope and unity. The darkness had been vanquished, and the future of Willow Oaks had been reclaimed. With the arrest of Margaret Simmons and the dismantling of the corrupt Homeowners Association, the residents of Willow Oaks were finally able to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The power had been restored, and the community was now in the process of healing and rebuilding. Greg and Sarah, the unlikely heroes of this saga, stood at the center of the community's resurgence, their efforts to expose the HOA's corruption having earned them the trust and respect of their neighbors. "It's been a long and difficult journey," Greg said, his voice tinged with a mixture of pride and exhaustion. "But we've proven that even the mightiest of institutions can be brought down when the people stand united." Sarah nodded in agreement, her eyes shining with determination. "This is just the beginning, though. We have a lot of work ahead of us to restore the trust and the pride that the HOA had sought to destroy." The residents, gathered around them, erupted in a chorus of cheers and applause, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that their community was once again in their own hands. One by one, the residents stepped forward, sharing their stories of the HOA's oppression and their hopes for the future. There were tears, laughter, and a renewed sense of camaraderie that had been absent for far too long. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the once troubled neighborhood, Greg and Sarah turned their attention to the task of rebuilding. They knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but they were more determined than ever to create a Willow Oaks that was truly worthy of its residents. "We're going to do this the right way," Greg declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "No more corrupt HOAs, no more backroom deals. From this day forward, Willow Oaks will be a community of, by, and for the people." The residents erupted in thunderous applause, their spirits lifted by the promise of a brighter future. And as the night drew in, the community came together, united in their determination to rebuild and reclaim what had been taken from them. The power had been restored, but the true light of Willow Oaks had been ignited, a flame that would burn brightly, illuminating the path forward and inspiring others to stand up and fight for the rights of their own communities. The battle for Willow Oaks was over, but the story of this resilient neighborhood was far from finished.